Who's going to be the next Fed chair?
No pressure, Mike.
But Kevin Hassett's still the favorite on this one's Polymarket.
Well, it's funny because he's gone up and down.
Yeah.
He was up, then he was down, and Kevin Warsh was up, and now he's down. And Chris Waller making a late bid on the outside is like a horse race.
It actually really is.
And then I heard today that Rick Reeder is actually coming in,
5%.
going to Mar-a-Lago to do his interview with the president.
How do you make sense? Is this what normally happens?
No.
Like as we get close?
No.
Okay. Forgive me, world, for using the word normal. But I mean, okay. So
any other questions, Gail?
I don't know. Stupid normal. This is my Friday. So how do you read between the tea leaves?
I don't think you can. Okay. I've tried. The person who probably would be most amenable to the president in terms of interest rates would be Kevin Hassett. But then people who know Kevin say he might not be able to get that through the Fed. Kevin Warsh might do more to upset the Fed and to revamp the Fed and do things that Trump wants. And you might have someone like Rick Reeder, who was kind of unknown in this, where Chris Waller would be much more of a traditional Fed person, even if he's calling for lower rates.
What about Michelle Bowman? Her name came up
She
yesterday.
seems to be off the list at this point. And
he mentioned her. He was asked about her yesterday.
He was pretty complimentary.
Well, he was
about
complimentary, but I think the thing that we're hearing is that they like the job she's doing as the regulatory vice chair.
Right.
She's deregulating the banks, and that's what the administration wants.
Look. Well, yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Well, no, if you want to follow, I want to ask something else.
On like the rates market side of this and who the bond market would prefer, do we have any indication of that? Are they all safe bets, according to the markets?
They're all not terrible bets, put it that way. The markets would probably prefer Chris Waller because they know he would follow sort of Fed protocol, and they could understand his logic and his thinking on things. They know that Kevin Warsh has experience at the Fed, but might want to upset some of the ways that they do business. And there is some worry about Kevin Hassett, as I mentioned, being too in the pocket of the president, although if you know how the Fed works, it wouldn't be easy for him to force through big rate cuts.
Mike, one of the things I think about a lot, and I think about after the great financial crisis, having Ben Bernanke as Fed chair, like sometimes we do have the Fed chair we need at a certain moment, right? Or maybe that's just luck that we get that right person, or maybe there is some science to it or thought. But what's the Fed chair that we need in 2026? How do you think about who do we need to have in that position?
Well, I think you need a couple of the skills that Jay Powell has. One is that he's very unflappable. And whoever the Fed chair is, if they don't cut rates by 200 basis points in the first year, the president's going to be after them. You know he's going to come out
whoever it is
and post on Truth Social about how terrible they are.
Nobody's pricing in 200 basis points of rate cuts.
Well, nobody is, except for the man in the White House. So, you've got to put up with that, be able to put up with that level of criticism. But the Fed has gotten much more individualized since the days of Alan Greenspan, who would walk into the room and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And so it's somebody who can develop a consensus. And so you could have people dissent and say, well, that I would have done it differently, but not come out and say, you've just totally destroyed the economy in the country. So that was a skill that Powell brought. As he was a lawyer, and worked in investment banking, and he has ability to bring people together.
And let's not forget, he was President Trump's choice.
Well, yes.
Is this the first time?
Yeah.
Is this a job that nobody, like, who would want this job? Like, you're not going to make everybody happy, and in fact, you're going to make probably the most important person in your world unhappy, because
I can name four people who want the job. But,
why though?
Well, if you're an economist, it's sort of the pinnacle. You're using all of your skills to help drive the economy in the one way that economists can do that, and it is a very, very important job. And a lot of people, certainly during the Greenspan years, called him the second most important person in the world to the President of the United States. So it has a lot of perceived power, and it has a lot of great responsibility. So it would be an honor.
I always think about that. Maybe we've already talked about this, but I do, again, go there that, there are times people say things either on a campaign trail or maybe, when talking about, their possibility of taking over something like the Fed chair. There's things you'll say, and then you get into it and you realize either the importance of a position and what you say and do, how that impacts not just U.S. markets, but global markets. And I just do wonder if that's something that we should assume will happen here as well, despite whatever pressure. You can't have a president who's constantly saying, I don't like you out, I don't like you out. That would create incredible volatility, right?
Well, that's the Lisa Cook case before the Supreme Court coming up in January. If the president can fire somebody for no reason at all, then you would probably have that under an administration with somebody in charge like we have now. But no, you become sort of responsible for the economy. And I don't want to say they would say they're not responsible for the markets. If you lose money, that's your problem. But they are also responsible for making sure they don't do something that crashes the markets.